Hey guys, tonight we slip into a slower world. The kind of place where candles burn low, sheep shuffle restlessly, and time moves like honey. I want you to imagine yourself waking not in your familiar bed, but on a scratchy woolen pallet. The kind that feels like it was designed by someone who thought comfort was a luxury best reserved for saints. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of bedding without complaining within minutes. But here, in a medieval village, you're expected to smile and carry on. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love for you to post your location and the local time where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge out into the cool air of dawn, the mist clinging low over the fields, your breath puffing out in little clouds. A shepherd's crook rests awkwardly in your hand, more symbolic than practical. Because, let's be honest, sheep are going to do what sheep want to do. Their bleats ripple across the valley, a constant reminder that your job is less about command and more about negotiation. The medieval day begins early because, frankly, there isn't much choice. With no electricity, your hours are tethered to the rising and setting of the sun. That's the mainstream fact. Daily life revolved around daylight, and people structured their chores, meals, and sleep around its rhythm. Yet not everything was so straightforward. In some villages, shepherds swore by peculiar charms to keep wolves at bay. Bits of iron hung from belts or whispered prayers, muttered into the dark. Historians still argue whether these practices were born out of genuine faith or just plain desperation. You shift your weight, listening to the creak of leather shoes against damp earth. The silence you hope for never really comes. Somewhere, a rooster is crowing for the third time, a dog barks at shadows, and church bells in the distance remind you that someone else already decided when the day should start. And yes, the bells are beautiful in theory, but after the sixth toll, even the most devout villager must have rolled over and groaned. There's a heaviness in the morning air, but also a simplicity. No smartphones buzzing, no emails stacking up. Just the steady rhythm of hooves, the smell of hay, and your own slightly itchy tunic. You scratch, shrug, and keep walking, already calculating how long until the sheep wander too far and you'll have to chase them. Spoiler, they always wander too far. And as you settle into this routine, you realize the long night that came before, its strange rhythms of sleep and waking, is only the beginning of our story. You shuffle through the damp grass, already wishing you'd brought thicker socks. Though, of course, medieval socks aren't exactly thick. They're more like stitched tubes of wool, itchy and stubbornly sliding down your calves as you move. And here, surrounded by sheep, you find yourself attempting the time-honored tradition, counting them. Simple, right? 1, 2, 3. Until, inevitably, you lose track because one sheep decided to wander behind a bush, another is nudging your leg for grain, and a third has that suspicious glint in its eye, like it's plotting an escape worthy of a stage magician. This is the image most people summon when they hear the phrase counting sheep. An old trick for falling asleep. Something quaint, silly, and oddly soothing. But here's the twist. Medieval shepherds were actually pretty bad at it. The problem wasn't laziness or lack of attention. It was math. Basic numbers weren't always the neat, universal language we assume today. In many villages, tallying flocks relied on systems of stones, knots, or even regional words for numbers that only made sense to locals. It wasn't about lining up sheep in neat rows and ticking them off like a teacher at recess. Instead, you might pocket a pebble for each sheep, and by the time you're done, your pouch feels like it belongs to a medieval weightlifter. The mainstream historical fact is this. Before standardized numerals spread widely, shepherds across Europe often used tally sticks or counters to keep track of their animals. Marks carved into wood or notches cut into bone gave a reliable visual record. It worked, but it wasn't elegant. If you're walking all day, it's a lot easier to forget which notch you last scratched than to forget a wandering sheep. The quirky tidbit is that some shepherds developed their own secret counting chants, short rhymes, half songs, sometimes in dialects no one outside the valley could understand. Imagine each village with its own bizarre bedtime playlist, except instead of lulling you to sleep, it was supposed to keep you awake and alert. And here's where scholars lean in. Historians still argue whether these chants were primarily practical, or if they doubled as protective charms, whispered not only to keep count, but to ward off misfortune. Was the shepherd actually saying 34, or was he saying 34, stay safe from wolves? Hard to prove, and yet it lingers as one of those mysteries of everyday medieval life we'll probably never quite solve. Meanwhile, you, the unlucky shepherd standing in damp grass. Try again. 1, 2, 3. Oh no, you sneezed. Start over. It's no wonder that the association of counting sheep with falling asleep grew over time. Not because it was soothing, but because it was boring. Staring at indistinguishable fluffy creatures for hours on end is the medieval equivalent of scrolling the same 3 apps over and over. Eventually, your brain just shuts down in protest. You lean on your crook, gaze unfocused, and catch sight of one sheep staring directly back at you, chewing with a slowness that feels almost personal. There's a joke here. The sheep seem to be counting you instead. They probably wonder how many mistakes you'll make before giving up for the evening. In practice, mistakes could be costly. Losing a sheep didn't just mean a gap in the flock. It meant lost income, lost wool, lost meat. Lords who owned the animals expected accountability, and heaven help the poor shepherd who miscounted too often. In some places, failure could even lead to fines or punishment. So, as dull as the task might sound to us now, the stakes were real. That's a fun thought. Your job performance review is literally tied to whether you can stay awake long enough to keep track of bleeding fluff balls. Of course, not every shepherd relied purely on counting. Some herds were small enough to know by face, or rather, by ear. Sheep bleat in subtly different tones, and attentive shepherds could tell them apart like a choir director recognizing each singer. Picture a medieval man leaning on his crook, eyes closed, murmuring, "That's Agnes. That's Henry. Oh, that must be the one with the crooked ear." It sounds improbable, but oral traditions from rural areas suggest it wasn't unheard of. Still, the stereotype endured. Shepherds, bored to the edge of sleep, muttering numbers into the void. And over centuries, that association slipped from the field into the bedroom. Counting sheep became the suggestion for restless minds, though whether anyone in history actually drifted off faster because of it is, shall we say, highly debatable. You can try it tonight if you like, though by sheep number 72, you'll probably start inventing names and backstories, which defeats the point. You step over a clump of grass, sheep scuttling nervously past your knees, and the sun warms your shoulders. The day stretches long ahead, endless hours of vigilance. It's hard not to compare this to modern insomnia. We may lie awake staring at glowing screens, our thoughts racing. They lay awake with the simpler frustration of numbers refusing to line up. Both versions are equally unhelpful. and equally capable of keeping you awake longer than you want. As the afternoon drags, the rhythm of counting fades into something more meditative. Your lips move without thought, your hand brushing the crook in lazy circles. You drift into that twilight zone between wakefulness and dreams, where numbers blur and sheep float like pale clouds across your vision. It's not sleep exactly, but it's close enough that you have to jerk yourself awake when one sheep bleats too loudly, reminding you that responsibility is never far away. So when you tuck yourself into bed later, whether on a straw mattress or a soft modern one, remember that this odd little ritual of counting sheep has roots deeper and clumsier than you might expect. It isn't magic, and it isn't foolproof, but it carries the weight of centuries of shepherds fumbling their math in the moonlight, creating a legacy of boredom so powerful it became a bedtime story of its own. You shift your cloak closer to your shoulders, the wool still heavy with the dampness of morning, and think about how strange the rhythm of sleep must have felt to people centuries ago. We picture the medieval night as one long slumber, stretching endlessly from dusk to dawn. But the truth is far less uniform and far more peculiar. For many, sleep came in 2 installments, broken neatly in half, like a strange nightly routine that was at once practical, mysterious, and oddly communal. The mainstream fact is that what we call segmented sleep was common across Europe well into the early modern period. People spoke of a first sleep and a second sleep, as though these were as natural as breakfast and supper. The first sleep often began soon after dusk. Families settled in, fires crackled low, and bodies gave in quickly to exhaustion. Then, after a few hours, they woke. Not everyone at once, not always deliberately, but often enough that it shaped culture. People might stir, light a candle, whisper a prayer, or even wander outside to check on the animals. Some shared secrets or told stories in hushed voices, before drifting back down into a second, softer slumber until dawn. Imagine it now, you lying on that straw mattress, back aching slightly, ears tuned to the muffled noises of your household. Around midnight, your eyes open without effort. There is no alarm, no glowing clock insisting that the hour is unnatural. It simply feels like part of the pattern. You shift, stretch, maybe stoke the coals in the hearth so the chill does not bite too sharply. Beside you, someone mumbles, perhaps mutters a prayer. Across the street, you hear the faint creak of a door as another neighbor rises, steps out into the night, and returns a few minutes later with wood or water. The quirky tidbit is that this midnight interval was sometimes called the watch, and people believed it had its own peculiar qualities, a time when dreams lingered near waking life and prayers carried special weight. Manuals of devotion suggested that petitions offered in the hours between first and second sleep were more likely to be heard. You can almost see it. Weary villagers, eyes half-lidded, mumbling their hopes into the shadows. And there's the joke. If heaven kept its customer service line open, the midnight shift must have been the busiest. Scholars still argue whether segmented sleep was universal, or whether it varied more by class and season. Some claim peasants working dawn to dusk may not have had the luxury of a gentle break in the night, while wealthier households, with servants to maintain fires and food, indulged more readily. Others counter that diaries, court records, and even medical treatises suggest the pattern was widespread, not just an aristocratic curiosity. What is certain is that the rigid 8-hour block of unbroken sleep we expect today would have seemed as foreign to them as their pattern does to us. Picture yourself stepping outside during that wakeful interlude. The village lies cloaked in silence, though not an absolute one. A distant dog barks. An owl shifts overhead, wings slicing the dark. The stars scatter sharp and clear, far brighter than the dim constellations we see through modern light pollution. You shiver, tuck your arms tighter, and glance around. It is both peaceful and eerie. The line between dream and waking feels thin, like you could step through it by accident. Inside, others may use this time more actively. A mother nurses a child. A farmer checks the latch on the barn. Some couples share quiet intimacy, a habit noted even in moralizing texts of the time. And here you are, caught between the two worlds, neither fully asleep nor fully awake, as though the night itself has split in sympathy. What strikes you, after a while, is how practical this rhythm really is. Without artificial lighting, evenings stretched long and uneventful. Falling asleep early was inevitable. Waking in the middle let people redistribute their rest across the night, aligning better with chores, fears, and seasonal demands. Imagine winter, when nights could last 14 hours or more. Few could sleep straight through without interruption. This system made the dark manageable, breaking it into pieces, offering a reprieve. And yet, there is an odd beauty to it too. You hear a sheep bleat in the distance, perhaps restless, and you picture shepherds also awake, pacing in fields, whispering their chants, counting again under the stars. Sleep, it seems, was less private then, less rigid. It was stitched into the rhythm of work, community, and even the cosmos. There's humor here as well. Suppose you confessed today that you woke in the middle of the night, wandered about, and then went back to sleep for several more hours. Someone might call it insomnia. Back then, it was just Tuesday. You would not be urged to try warm milk, to count sheep, or to meditate. You would simply sit, stare at the fire, and wait for the rhythm to return. As you settle once more into that second sleep, the straw scratching against your neck, you feel the heaviness descend again. Outside, the village quiets. A rooster stirs, but does not yet crow. The fire collapses into glowing embers. The rhythm pulls you downward, steady and slow, as though the night itself is rocking you. What emerges from this curious pattern is a sense of how different daily life felt in a world tethered to natural rhythms. Darkness was not a void to be conquered, but a landscape to be crossed in stages. Each segment of sleep was a path, with a clearing in the middle where you could stop, breathe and look around. And as you finally slip into that second stretch of rest, you understand why memories of segmented sleep linger in folklore, in proverbs, even in the casual rhythm of storytelling. The medieval night was never a blank slate. It was alive, with its own watchful interlude, its own strange heartbeat. And you, tucked into your modest bed, are part of that rhythm, even if only for a moment, before the next day rises to claim you again. You stir again, rub in your eyes, as a faint orange glow flickers against the wall. The fire has burned down, just a trace of warmth left in the coals, and the shadows stretch long across the beams overhead. The night lingers, but your thoughts are already sliding into the practical details of survival. You think of light, of how precious it is in this world, how every hour of illumination comes at a price. The mainstream fact is simple enough. Candles were expensive. A tallow candle, made from rendered animal fat, smelled unpleasant and smoked heavily. Beeswax candles, reserved for churches or wealthy households, burned brighter and cleaner, but cost so much more that an ordinary family might never see one outside of Mass. Imagine holding in your hand something that seems so ordinary to us, a small stick of light, and knowing it represented not convenience, but luxury. Every flicker you burned away was money turned to smoke. You rise, stretch, and fumble with the stub of tallow near your bedside. Its flame spits a greasy scent into the air, something between kitchen scraps and faint soap. Not charming, not cozy, but necessary. And you quickly learn why people rationed light so carefully. Each inch burned means one less for tomorrow, one less for a week when nights are longer still. So you pinch it out, sit back down, and let the dark swallow most of the room again. The quirky tidbit is that timekeeping itself was also bound to light. Some households used candle clocks, marking intervals by letting wax burn to certain notches. In theory, it was clever, but in practice, it was a disaster waiting to happen. A single draft, a slightly crooked wick, or even a curious cat could ruin your measurement entirely. Picture yourself explaining to your lord that you overslept not because you were lazy, but because the family candle clock fell over after the neighbor's chicken barged inside. Somehow, that excuse doesn't sound convincing, even in the Middle Ages. Scholars still argue whether ordinary villagers cared much about time in the way we do today. Did they need precise hours, or were rhythms of sun and bell enough? Evidence suggests a mix. In towns, church bells marked canonical hours, calling people to prayer or labor, shaping lives into predictable beats. In the countryside, time was looser, guided by dawn, by chores, by shadows lengthening across a field. Yet even here, in this fragile balance, people experimented with ways to tame time. Candles, sundials, even primitive water clocks. Each method imperfect, each a reminder of how slippery hours could be. You pull your cloak tighter, settling against the mattress again, trying to imagine what it felt like to live in such half-light. The dark wasn't just absence, it was presence, alive with sounds you couldn't see. A door creaking, the sigh of wind in the rafters, the faint rustle of straw as someone shifts beside you. And all the while, that stubborn flame of memory. Candles that gutter too quickly. Oil lamps that sputter when a draft sneaks through. Hours measured in drips or burns, rather than in neat digits. It strikes you how restless this world must have been. Even the wealthy, with access to better materials, never had enough. Great halls glowed during feasts, yes, but afterward, the rooms dimmed to shadows, tapestries swallowing what little light remained. Bedrooms of nobles might have a lamp or two, but nothing like the bright overhead glare we take for granted. If you wanted to read, you needed to sit close, careful not to scorch the page. If you wanted to write, your eyes strained, your ink smudged in the uncertain glow. And here lies another quiet truth. Sleep itself was shaped by the cost of light. People turned in earlier because they could not afford to stay awake. Imagine the modern joke, early to bed, early to rise, because otherwise you'll burn through next month's candle budget. It sounds absurd, but for many it was reality. Work, rest, and even dreams bent to the stubborn economy of flame. You lean back, hearing a distant bell strike. Its echo wanders across the rooftops, reminding you that someone else is keeping track, whether you are or not. Monks rise at appointed hours, trudging from cloister to chapel, chanting by candlelight. Town watchmen pace the streets, lanterns swinging, eyes scanning for danger. In their hands, light becomes authority, proof that someone wakes while others sleep. And you, lying here, know that even your rest is shaped by this fragile glow. How much do you ration? How much do you dare spend when tomorrow promises more darkness still? The thought almost makes you laugh, because here you are centuries later, surrounded by electric lamps, LED clocks, glowing phones, all pouring out light as though it grows on trees. Yet, close your eyes, and you can feel the weight of that earlier world, where shadows pressed harder, where every flicker carried meaning. So, you settle into the dark again, a little more aware of its depth. You think of candle clocks tipping over, of bells tolling uneven hours, of families huddled around a single flame. You breathe, slow, steady, as though the night itself is teaching you patience. The sheep outside shift restlessly, hooves crunching against dirt. A dog lets out one sharp bark before quieting. Somewhere, another candle sputters and dies, plunging a neighbor into deeper shadow. And the village, stitched together by fragments of light, drifts towards silence once more. If nothing else, this odd dance of candles, clocks, and costs reminds you of how fragile control over time and rest once was. Every hour felt provisional, every flame uncertain. Sleep, like life itself, bent to the limits of wax and oil. And perhaps that is why dreams seemed to carry so much weight, why the night itself was filled with meanings we can scarcely imagine. You wake with a stiff neck, shifting uncomfortably on the uneven surface beneath you. The truth hits quickly. Your bed is not a feathered cloud or a supportive mattress with memory foam. It is a sack, filled with straw, that has long since been flattened, poking through the seams, scratching at your skin. You roll to one side, and a particularly sharp stalk presses like a needle into your shoulder. If this is rest, you think, then comfort was clearly not the design priority. The mainstream historical fact here is this: pillows, as we know them, were rare in medieval Europe. The wealthy might enjoy cushions filled with down, though even then, the feathers often poked through the fabric, pricking faces during the night. For most people, however, pillows were sacks filled with whatever was available: straw, reeds, or even bundled clothing. Some relied on wooden blocks, surprisingly common in certain traditions, which lifted the head slightly, but offered no softness at all. Imagine lying your cheek on a wooden wedge after a long day herding sheep. It's like sleeping on a poorly shaped cutting board. You shift again, imagining the adjustments people must have made to manage such crude bedding. Families reused old sacks, stuffed them anew each season, shaking out pests when they remembered. Of course, those pests usually came back. The straw was rarely clean, and it provided a playground for insects that treated your face as a midnight highway. You can almost hear a sarcastic medieval salesman. "Buy now, get the crawling sensation for free." The quirky tidbit is that some regions believed certain pillow fillings had medicinal or protective power. For instance, herbs like lavender or chamomile were sometimes mixed into straw, partly to mask the smell and partly for supposed healing benefits. One text even recommends lettuce leaves under the pillow to encourage sleep, a medieval version of a wellness hack. If you tried that today, you would probably just wake up hungry for salad. Scholars still argue whether these pillow practices were widespread or isolated curiosities. Were herb-stuffed pillows common among peasants, or only among those who had gardens to spare? Did the use of wooden blocks persist as a cultural tradition, or out of necessity? Evidence is scattered, and much of what we know comes from scattered household records and church inventories. Still, the fragments remind us that what we take as universal, laying your head on something soft, was once a mark of wealth and choice. You press your cheek into the imagined straw again, hearing the faint crunch as though the bed itself is sighing in protest. Comfort is relative. If you had spent your day walking miles, tending sheep, hauling water, maybe even chopping wood, Your body might collapse into this rude support without complaint. But in the quiet hours, as your thoughts drift, the flaws press harder. A poke in the back, a musty smell rising with your breath, a faint tickle that makes you slap at your ear, wondering if it's hay or something alive. It becomes clear why sleep carried a different weight in this world. It was never guaranteed to be refreshing. You might wake sore, or half-rested, yet still expected to carry on. There is a wry humor in imagining noble lords dozing in their featherbeds, feathers poking through to jab at their noses, while peasants muttered curses at their straw sacks, united across class by the misery of batted design. And perhaps that shared discomfort explains why pillows occasionally became objects of satire. Some records show jesters mocking nobles who complained about lumps in their bedding. Imagine your grace upon a peasant's sack, then tell me of your pains. The joke lands easily. Discomfort was everywhere, but the privilege to whine about it was not evenly shared. You turn, propping your head on your arm, and think of how people improvised. Clothing bunched beneath the neck, cloaks folded twice, even pets, curling close enough that a warm flank might serve as a pillow. One can imagine a weary shepherd, using his dog's side as support, both of them sighing in relief. A scene at once practical and oddly tender. There's also a symbolic edge to pillows in this period. To rest your head was to surrender yourself to vulnerability. Dreams, spirits, even demons were thought to linger near. That might explain why charms were tucked under pillows, protective objects meant to ward off nightmares or mischief. A child might sleep atop a token from a parent. An adult might slide a prayer strip beneath their sack. The pillow, crude as it was, became a threshold between the waking and dreaming worlds. And so you drift, half asleep on straw, listening to the quiet movements of the household. Someone stirs beside you. Someone coughs in the dark. You adjust your weight, shifting from one prickly angle to another, resigned to the fact that no position is perfect. The humor here is in its universality. Centuries change, but humans still wrestle with pillows, fluffing, folding, punching them into shape. We remain at war with sleep's most basic accessory. What lingers most is the contrast. Today, we scroll through endless pillow ads promising miracles. Cooling foam, ergonomic shapes, lavender scents. Back then, people accepted that a pillow was whatever you could stuff into a sack, and miracles were not included. Yet the need was the same. A place to rest the head, to support dreams, to soften the weight of existence for a few short hours. So you sigh, settle again, and imagine yourself finally giving in. The straw crackles softly, the wooden beams creak above, and your body, tired beyond complaint, lets the discomfort fade. Your head grows heavy, your eyes drift closed, and you surrender to sleep despite the flaws. It is not comfort as you know it, but it is enough to carry you through the night. And outside, the world waits, dim and restless, preparing its next small challenge for you when the sun rises once again. The draft arrives before the dawn, sliding across the floorboards like a sly intruder, nudging at your ankles, as if to remind you that walls and roofs are only half the battle. In a medieval hall, warmth is a suggestion rather than a guarantee. That is why you glance upward, past the rough beams and the wavering shadows, to the fabric hanging like a ship's sail around your bed. The canopy is not a luxury here, it is survival. The mainstream historical fact is that canopy beds, those great wooden frames draped with curtains, were widespread in medieval Europe. not only among nobility, but in more modest forms in common households. They served as insulation against drafts, protection from insects, and, in crowded rooms, a thin veil of privacy. Think of them as medieval tents pitched indoors, an extra layer between fragile bodies and the unpredictable air. You tug at the fabric, rough wool mixed with faded linen, its edges fraying from years of use. The curtain swings, and the draft is tamed, at least for the moment. You exhale, and your breath stays closer, less eager to rush away into the rafters. The bed becomes a cocoon, and suddenly the world feels smaller, safer, like you have pulled the night itself around your shoulders. The quirky tidbit is that bed curtains were sometimes richly decorated, even in modest homes. Embroidered saints, painted patterns, or simple charms might be stitched into the cloth. Some households treated the fabric as a canvas for stories, scenes of hunts or battles, tiny stitched animals leaping across the weave. Others pinned sprigs of herbs, rosemary or lavender, not for beauty, but for protection. The curtain became not just insulation, but talisman, a shield against both cold and mischief. Imagine falling asleep with embroidered lions, glaring sternly at the shadows, their stitched teeth meant to frighten away anything creeping too near. Historians still argue whether these curtains were primarily practical or if they carried symbolic roles as well. Did peasants who hung rough cloth around their beds do so purely for warmth? Or did they too believe in its protective power? Were the grand canopies of nobles expressions of status more than necessity? The truth likely lies in both directions. Cloth held heat, but it also held meaning. To close the curtain was to mark the threshold between public and private, to declare that the night had begun. You slide back against the pillow, if we can be generous and still call it that, and listen to the muffled world beyond the curtain. A cough echoes faintly, someone shifting in the straw by the hearth. The air inside your little enclosure feels warmer, closer, as though you are breathing the same rhythm as the fabric itself. It sways slightly, creaking where the frame strains, and you imagine the whole bed as a ship on some dark, silent sea. The humor is in how much fuss this curtain demands. In the morning, it traps smells as efficiently as it traps warmth. Smoke, sweat, damp wool, all linger in the folds, waiting to ambush you. You can picture a medieval housewife shaking out the curtains each season, muttering curses at the weight of the fabric and the stubborn odors clinging like tenants who refuse to leave. Still, when the night pressed cold fingers through the cracks of the hall, those same curtains became blessings, even if they smelled faintly of last week's stew. The privacy they offered was delicate, but real. In a room where several people might sleep side by side, family members, servants, even strangers, the curtain allowed for a pocket of separation. It was not soundproof, not truly hidden, but it softened the gaze of others. To climb into such a bed and draw the fabric close was to declare, "This space is mine, at least for a while." In that way, it was both shield and stage, both veil and boundary. The image that stays with you is how different the night must have felt inside those curtains. Outside, the hall is a wide chamber, filled with echoes, drafts, and shifting shapes. Inside, the world narrows. The light from the dying fire becomes a faint glow on fabric walls. Shadows blur, noises soften. The bed becomes a miniature home within a home, a little fortress against the dark. And yet, the curtain cannot silence everything. You still hear the distant bells marking hours, the shuffle of animals outside, the creak of the roof as wind presses against it. You still feel the straw poking through the mattress, the uneven frame beneath your back. Comfort is never absolute, but the curtain makes endurance easier. And in this world, endurance is often the closest you come to peace. There's a joke waiting here too. You may think of modern luxury beds with blackout curtains, ergonomic mattresses, and carefully curated aromas. Yet even then, you still toss and turn. A medieval sleeper, with straw poking ribs and greasy smoke clinging to cloth, might have laughed at the idea of needing lavender candles or sound machines. Their lullaby was the creak of wood and the occasional bleat of a sheep drifting in from outside. You close your eyes, breathing in the closeness of the space, letting the fabric murmur its hush. The bed sways faintly again, or maybe it is just your imagination. You think of how many generations curled into such cocoons, how many whispered secrets, how many dreams floated against these curtains, like moths against lamplight. The thought is both comforting and strange, knowing your own sleep now lingers in their company. And slowly, you let the world drift, sheltered by cloth that is neither luxurious nor pitiful, but simply what it is, a human attempt to soften the edge of the night. You draw the fabric close, hear its faint rustle, and the draft finally retreats. Darkness presses, but it presses gently now, like a blanket tucked too tightly, reminding you that sleep, however imperfect, is still waiting. You shift beneath the canopy, only half dreaming. And the first thing you notice is not silence, but the opposite. The medieval night, far from being a quiet expanse of calm, is restless, crowded with sound. You might imagine a world without cars, without humming wires, without blaring televisions, as if that would mean serenity. Instead, you discover that every hour of darkness carries its own orchestra, and none of the players have agreed on the same tune. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval towns and villages were rarely silent after dark. Church bells tolled the hours or summoned people to prayer. Watchmen cried the time, warning of fire or thieves. Animals kept in close quarters, clattered, groaned, and sometimes bellowed at the moon. Even in rural spaces, the chorus of dogs, owls, and restless livestock made silence more of a wish than a reality. The idea of a still, quiet countryside is a modern fantasy, born from distance. For the people living it, nights were alive with constant interruptions. You roll onto your side, pressing an ear against your arm, but the noises filter through anyway. A rooster begins crowing too early, confused perhaps by torchlight from the street. Someone curses him in muffled tones, but the bird insists on his role, as though auditioning for a performance no one asked to attend. You chuckle softly. Even now, centuries later, roosters remain the original alarm clocks, except unlike smartphones, there's no snooze button. The quirky tidbit is that some households employed professional knocker-uppers in later centuries, especially in busy towns. Their job was to wake people at appointed hours, sometimes by tapping on windows with long sticks. Earlier equivalents existed in medieval towns as well. Informal arrangements where neighbors roused each other, or where watchmen doubled as human alarms. Imagine lying in bed, half asleep, when a stick suddenly raps your shutter and a gruff voice mutters, "Time for prayers." It may not be the gentle wake-up you dream of, but it was considered reliable. And to think, people complain today about phone notifications. Historians still argue whether noise in medieval nights was resented or simply accepted as part of life. Some evidence suggests complaints about rowdy neighbors, wandering musicians, and drunken revelers. Yes, even then, people stumbled home singing off-key. Other records imply that noise was background, so constant that it faded into a kind of medieval white noise. Which is it? Perhaps both. Like us, some cursed the racket, while others found comfort in the familiar soundtrack of their community. The bells, of course, were unavoidable. They marked not just hours, but obligations. A midnight peal might mean prayer in a monastery or in a town. It might signal danger, fire, attack, or an escaped animal causing havoc. The irony is sharp. Bells were meant to order time, yet they often disrupted sleep. A sacred cycle broken by the very guardians of order. You imagine villagers groaning at each toll, muttering prayers not of devotion, but of frustration. Dogs added their own relentless notes. Kept to guard homes and flocks, they barked at strangers, at shadows, at the moon. Once one bark began, others joined, cascading across the village until the night vibrated with canine outrage. You sigh, pulling the curtain tighter, wondering how anyone drifted peacefully through such interruptions. Yet, for the people of the time, these noises carried meaning, warning, protection, reminders of life moving around them. There is humor in imagining how easily modern people might have fared. Used to double-paned windows and sound machines, we would probably lose patience within minutes. Picture yourself yelling out the window at a braying donkey, only to be told by a passing neighbor that the donkey has more right to the night than you do. Sleep would feel less like a private retreat and more like a negotiation with every creature in earshot. Inside the hall, sounds carried differently. Families sleeping side by side shared every snore, every cough, every shifting limb. Children whimpered in dreams, elders groaned when rolling over, and in the corner someone muttered half a prayer while sliding back into slumber. The curtain muffled, but never erased. Privacy was a fantasy. Sound wove everyone together, willingly or not. What becomes clear is that medieval people did not expect silence. Their nights were porous, filled with interruptions they rarely controlled. And yet they slept. Not always deeply, not always fully, but enough to carry them into the next day. That, perhaps, is the lesson hidden beneath the racket. Sleep is not perfection, but adaptation. You stretch, listening now to the layered hum. An owl hoots, a dog growls softly, a cart rattles down the street as someone lugs goods even at this hour. The wooden wheels clack against uneven stones, a rhythm steady enough to lull if you surrender to it. And then, just as you begin to drift, the rooster crows again, victorious in his persistence. You groan, but laugh too, realizing that in this world, the joke is always on the sleeper. There's also a subtle comfort in the noise. Each sound reminds you that you are not alone. The community breathes and shifts with you, sharing the same fragile hours. The bark that startles also assures you the watch is awake. The bell that interrupts also tells you time still flows, measured and certain. Even the rooster, insufferable though he is, insists that dawn will come. So you close your eyes once more, weaving the cacophony into a lullaby. It is imperfect, ragged, sometimes jarring, but it is alive, and slowly, you let yourself sink into it. Not fighting, but floating, like a leaf carried by a restless stream. Sleep in this noisy world does not come from silence. It comes from surrendering to the rhythm of sound. And with that surrender, you drift, the night alive around you, carrying you forward to whatever strange moment comes next. The curtain sways faintly as you stir again, your dreams folding into the sounds you thought you'd left outside. It is easy to see why dreams felt so significant here, why people leaned toward explanations, larger than themselves. You wake in a world that never fully sleeps. And when your mind fills the silence with visions, those visions must carry weight. The mainstream historical fact is this. In the Middle Ages, dreams were often considered messages, divine, demonic, or at least significant. Church teachings warned that some dreams could be temptations sent by the devil, while others might reveal holy truths. Learned physicians, influenced by ancient texts, sometimes explained dreams as the result of bodily humors shifting during the night. Either way, dreams mattered. They were cataloged, debated, and occasionally feared. You shift onto your back, staring at the dark space above. The rafters creak, and for a moment you imagine shapes there, faces hidden in the grain of the wood, shadows bending into forms. Last night's dream clings stubbornly, sheep with human eyes, counting you instead of the other way around, each bleat sounding like a number. You smile faintly, shaking your head, though in a medieval hall, such a dream might have prompted a consultation. Was it a warning? Was it nonsense? Or was it some strange mixture of both? The quirky tidbit is that dream manuals circulated, offering ready-made interpretations. Dream of falling. Expect misfortune. Dream of flying. Perhaps spiritual elevation. Dream of teeth falling out. Bad news ahead. These manuals blended folklore, superstition, and classical ideas, creating guides that people treated with surprising seriousness. Imagine a medieval friend nudging you awake, saying, "Tell me what you saw, and I'll tell you what it means." And it's not so different from modern horoscopes, equal parts belief, entertainment, and quiet dread. Historians still argue whether ordinary peasants believed dreams so strongly, or if dream interpretation remained more the domain of scholars and clergy. Some evidence suggests rural communities shared their own folklore, assigning local meanings to dreams, while elites leaned on classical sources like Artemidorus. The divide is murky, but what's certain is that the line between waking and dreaming was less rigid than we treat it today. For them, a dream was not just a fleeting image. It was another layer of reality, overlapping with the day. You turn your head, half listening as someone mutters in their sleep nearby. The words are garbled, but you imagine how such midnight mumbling might unsettle others. Was it random, or was it a visitation? Many believed demons could press upon sleepers, sitting heavy on the chest, stealing breath and whispering lies. The figure of the nightmare, later evolving into our word nightmare, was feared across Europe. People spoke of waking paralyzed, hearts hammering, convinced something sat upon them in the dark. And who can blame them? Even now, sleep paralysis feels otherworldly. The curtain shifts again, and you think of charms tucked beneath pillows, tiny crosses, slips of scripture, herbs bound in cloth, to guard against these nocturnal assaults. Children might be told to recite a prayer before bed, not just to thank God, but to keep shadows at bay. Adults, too, whispered formulas, hedging their rest against whatever prowled in the unseen. Sleep was never just about rest. It was about risk. And still, there's humor to be found. Imagine waking from a dream where you are chasing pigs through the market square, only to be told solemnly by a neighbor that it means your fortune will rise. You might laugh, but perhaps you'd cling to the prediction anyway. Because hope is always welcome. Dreams gave people language for uncertainty, ways to explain or soften the sharp edges of life. You close your eyes again, replaying one of those stranger medieval tales. A farmer dreams his cow speaks, warning of poor harvests. and he wakes to find the animal dead the next day. Coincidence? Proof? Or a story polished in retelling? Hard to say, but such anecdotes spread, feeding the sense that the night was never idle. In towns, too, dreams became social. People shared them by the fire, reciting images as though rehearsing theater. Each detail mattered. A shoe out of place, a bird circling overhead, a familiar face appearing in a strange role. All became clues to interpret. And you, lying here, centuries later in imagination, can almost hear the low murmurs of families comparing visions, voices weaving meaning out of fog. The danger, of course, lay in excess. Authorities warned against trusting dreams too much, reminding believers that not all visions came from God. Some were illusions, some were tricks of digestion, some were devilish snares. The line blurred constantly, leaving ordinary people to balance awe and skepticism. It is not unlike us, scrolling through dream interpretation websites at 2 a.m, torn between disbelief and the secret hope that the answer might be real. You sigh, adjusting the blanket closer, as though to guard yourself against whatever strange visitor the next dream may carry. The air feels thicker now, your thoughts heavier, and already you sense the edges of reality bending once more. A sheep bleats outside, but in your half-conscious mind, it sounds like laughter. You smile, letting the absurdity tug you downward. The medieval world, it seems, never drew sharp lines between waking and dreaming. Night was porous, open to meaning. To them, your restless visions were not wasted fragments. They were maps, warnings, sometimes even promises. And though you may doubt, you cannot quite shake the feeling that something waits in the dark, watching, whispering, counting you as you drift. And so you give in again, sleep's grip stronger, the curtain swaying like the slow breath of some unseen watcher. Whether dream, demon, or just the restless churn of the mind, the night welcomes you back into its tangled embrace. The curtain breathes lightly against your shoulder as you shift, and once again the quiet illusion of solitude cracks. Because in truth, you are not alone in this room, nor in most medieval beds. Privacy as you imagine it is a luxury that does not exist here. Families, travelers, and sometimes strangers share sleeping spaces, pressed close by necessity, by economy, and occasionally by tradition. It is a different sort of intimacy, one that blurs lines between comfort and discomfort, between safety and exposure. The mainstream historical fact is straightforward. In medieval Europe, it was common for people to sleep in groups, families crowded together in lofts, parents with children, servants at the foot of the same bed, sometimes even guests folded into the same blanket. Inns offered travelers shared beds as a matter of course, pairing strangers without hesitation. The expectation was not scandal, but practicality. Space and resources were scarce, and beds, especially sturdy wooden frames, were expensive. A shared bed meant fewer costs, fewer fires, and sometimes fewer fears. You imagine yourself stepping into a roadside inn, weary after a long day's walk. The air is thick with smoke, and the smell of stew gone slightly sour. The innkeeper waves you toward a bed, already half occupied. A merchant lies there, snoring, boots still on, one hand draped across his chest like he is guarding invisible treasure. You hesitate, but what choice do you have? You slide into the open space, tug the rough blanket up, and try not to notice the warmth of someone else's body so close. The quirky tidbit is that bed sharing sometimes created unexpected bonds, or unexpected comedy. Records tell of strangers waking entangled, mistaking limbs for their own, or kicking each other awake in restless dreams. One amusing story describes two men sharing a bed, one rolling over and muttering a prayer, the other groaning that holiness could at least wait until morning. Another tale suggests travelers used bed sharing as a way to gossip, trading stories and whispers until both drifted off. The bed, awkward though it was, became a space of negotiation between strangers, between classes, sometimes even between enemies. Historians still argue whether this widespread practice was resented or accepted. Some sources describe constant complaints about fleas, snoring, or the awkwardness of strangers pressed too close. Others suggest it was normalized, not considered unusual at all. In an era without abundant resources, the modern concept of my own bed would have seemed selfish, perhaps even unthinkable. What we consider intrusion was simply the fabric of life. You shift again, imagining yourself wedged into such a bed. To your left, a child mutters in his sleep, his toes pushing against your shin. To your right, the merchant snores in uneven bursts, as though conducting an orchestra of congestion. Somewhere near your feet, a small dog curls, shuffling until it claims the warmest spot. You smile faintly at the absurdity. Sleep is supposed to refresh, yet here it feels like a battle between elbows, knees, and fur. Yet, despite the discomfort, there was safety in numbers. Darkness was a time of risk. Fire, thieves, animals, spirits. And to sleep alone was to invite vulnerability. A group in one bed meant warmth, yes, but also vigilance. If something stirred in the night, chances were good that someone would wake. In this sense, the crowded bed was less about intimacy and more about community, a shared defense against the unpredictable. And there is a strange tenderness to the picture. Parents curling around children, arms forming protective barriers, servants sleeping at their master's feet, bound not only by duty, but by custom. Even strangers, awkward at first, might learn to relax into the rhythm of shared breathing. It reminds you that comfort sometimes lies not in solitude, but in presence, however messy that presence might be. The humor lingers too. Picture yourself adjusting for the 10th time, only to have someone roll onto you. You grumble, elbow back, and the entire bed ripples with complaints. It is the medieval version of fighting over the blanket, except the blanket is thin, the room is cold, and there is always that one person who snores like a church bell. No wonder morning prayers were said with such enthusiasm. Everyone was simply relieved to have survived the night together. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders, half laughing at the thought of strangers exchanging sleepy apologies in the dark. The air is close, carrying the scent of wood smoke, wool, and sweat. It is not pleasant, but it is familiar, grounding. For people then, this was the texture of life. Bodies pressed together not by more, but by circumstance. Each night a reminder that survival was collective. There is also an echo of ritual. Some households assigned places in the bed by order, elders near the wall, younger children toward the edge, servants at the foot. The arrangement reflected hierarchy, even in sleep. Others rotated positions seasonally, shifting closer for warmth in winter, spreading out in summer heat. The bed, humble though it was, mirrored the structures of society, binding people into patterns they could not easily escape. As you close your eyes once more, you hear the soft rhythm of others breathing. It is not silence, nor is it solitude, but it is steady and somehow reassuring. You realize that the discomforts, The snores, the smells, the elbows were not obstacles to rest, but the context of it. People slept as they lived, together, entangled, part of a shared fabric they did not question. And you, centuries later, can still sense it. That fragile closeness, that strange mixture of irritation and comfort, lingers like the memory of warmth long after the fire has gone out. You smile again, because for all its flaws, there is something undeniably human in this crowded, imperfect rest. The curtain sways, and the draft brushes lightly at your cheek. You tug the blanket tighter, shifting just enough to avoid another elbow, and surrender once more to the night. You stir again, blinking into the dimness, and realize that the room is no longer entirely still. Someone across the chamber has risen, moving with the soft shuffle of bare feet against wood. A faint glow flickers as a taper is lit, the flame trembling like a nervous messenger. You understand immediately. It is the interval between first and second sleep, that curious middle chapter of the night. And in this space, people do not only toss and turn, they act. The mainstream historical fact is that this wakeful interval was often used for prayers or small tasks. Manuals of devotion encouraged people to rise and recite psalms or confess sins while the world was still hushed. Physicians recommended the break as healthy, believing digestion required it. Court records mention crimes committed in these hours, evidence that the night was not a blank expanse of rest. Instead, the time between sleeps was alive, filled with purposeful motion. You sit up slowly, your blanket falling in folds, and listen to the faint creak of a door. Someone steps outside, perhaps to fetch water or relieve themselves. The air that slips in carries the bite of frost, sharp enough to make you shiver. Then comes another sound, clay scraping softly. A pot moved near the fire. The smell of broth or bread drifts faintly, reminding you that for some, the middle of the night was also a chance for a snack. The quirky tidbit is that people often ate small meals in this interval, especially in winter, when nights stretched long. Bread dipped in warm milk, bits of meat, or even leftover stew found their way into bowls. For couples, the time between sleeps was sometimes considered ideal for intimacy. Medical texts of the day even recommended it, claiming the body was more balanced and refreshed after the first round of rest. You laugh quietly at the thought. Romance by candlelight, yes, but also with cold floors, thin blankets, and the possibility of children snoring inches away. Still, it seems people managed. Historians still argue whether this nightly break was universally observed or whether it varied by class and region. Some records suggest it was more common in towns, where church bells and neighborly sounds made rising natural. Others argue that rural workers, exhausted by endless labor, may have slept straight through more often. The evidence is scattered, but the persistence of references to first sleep and second sleep hints strongly that the practice was widespread, even if its details differed. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, trying to imagine yourself in such a rhythm. At first it feels unnatural. Why interrupt rest deliberately? Yet as you watch the faint figures move in the dimness, you sense the practicality. The fire is fed. Children are checked. Prayers are whispered. Life continues, gently, in a pause before dawn. This wakeful hour becomes less a disruption than a rhythm, a hinge in the night. You step quietly to the hearth, where embers glow faintly. Someone else crouches there, stirring a pot with half-lidded eyes. The smell of onions and herbs rises, earthy and familiar. He offers you a small bowl, and you cradle it, the heat sinking gratefully into your palms. The broth is thin, but it carries a comfort beyond flavor. In this cold and crowded night, warmth itself is the gift. There is humor, too. Imagine a child tugging at a parent's sleeve in the darkness. "I'm hungry." The parent groans, knowing there is no refrigerator to raid, only yesterday's bread gone stiff. Yet they rise anyway, gnawing quietly in the flicker of the fire, muttering complaints that echo down centuries. Midnight snacks, eternal and inevitable. And there are prayers. In a corner, a woman kneels, her voice low but steady. She prays for health, for safety, for her children's futures. Manuals from the time assured her that midnight prayers held special power, that angels drew closer in those hours, that heaven listened more intently when the world was dark. You watch her bow her head, the candle flame painting her face with gold, and realize that faith shaped the very texture of the night. The air grows still again. Bowls are emptied, prayers whispered, fires stirred back into glowing life. One by one, figures return to their bedding. You follow, laying yourself down, the straw rustling beneath your weight. You tug the curtain closed, shutting out the dim glow. The warmth of the broth lingers in your chest, spreading slowly like a second kind of flame. It strikes you how practical and yet poetic this rhythm must have felt. By dividing the night, people found space. Space for prayer, for food, for conversation, for love. It was a pause within rest, a recognition that life itself did not stop at dusk. Modern nights often feel rushed, pressured to produce an unbroken span of sleep. Medieval nights unfolded more loosely, like two halves of a story, each with its own mood. The curtain sways faintly, and your body begins to sink again. The noise outside softens, footsteps fading, bowls set aside. You exhale, your breath warm against the cloth, and slip once more into the current of rest. The second sleep waits, heavy and slow, ready to carry you to dawn. And as you drift, you understand that the medieval night was not less rich for its interruptions. If anything, it was fuller, shaped by hunger, faith, warmth, and the quiet murmur of human need. You wake again with the faintest creak of wood underfoot, and this time you notice something else. Not everyone around you sleeps in the same kind of comfort. In fact, the word comfort is unevenly distributed. Where one bed might sag under layers of down and embroidered linen, another is little more than a mat on the floor, straw flattened to dust. It is impossible to ignore the contrast, the sharp line drawn between peasant and prince, poor and noble. Sleep itself was divided, as much a marker of status as clothing or food. The mainstream historical fact is that noble households often possessed featherbeds, sometimes stacked high, layered with soft linens and wool blankets, while peasants usually slept on sacks of straw spread across the floor. Inventories from castles list beds as valuable property, handed down through wills, while humble cottages relied on pallets shared by entire families. The bed, a piece of furniture so ordinary to us, was then a symbol of wealth and inheritance. You roll onto your side, picturing the noble chamber, carved oak frame, canopy embroidered with heraldic beasts, sheets washed more often than most villagers' tunics. The fire burns steadily, attended by servants who stoke it through the night. Curtains close tight, trapping warmth. Feathers give, cradling the body like clouds. If you are lucky enough to be noble, you sink into this embrace, dreaming without the bite of drafts or the prickle of straw. Now picture the peasant cottage. The floor is packed earth. The bed is a sack, hastily stuffed with hay cut months ago. Each turn makes the straw crunch, releasing dust that stings your throat. Children crowd close, kicking in their sleep. A cloak doubles as a blanket, thin against the chill. Mice rustle in the corners, bold enough to nibble discarded crumbs. Here, sleep is less a luxury than a negotiation with discomfort. The quirky tidbit is that some nobles traveled with their beds, literally dismantled them, and carried the frames, mattresses, and linens from manor to manor. The bed was not only furniture, but a portable mark of rank, a movable throne of slumber. Meanwhile, peasants might have to rebuild their pallet each season, stuffing new straw after harvest. Imagine explaining to a traveler today, "Yes, I carry my bed with me wherever I go," versus, "Yes, I rebuild my bed every autumn from scratch." Both are strange, but both were normal. Historians still argue whether the contrast between noble and peasant sleep was as stark as records suggest. Some claim that well-off peasants, especially prosperous farmers, owned better bedding than often assumed, while poorer nobles in smaller manors may not have lived in constant luxury. The neat division between straw and feathers is tempting, but perhaps oversimplified. Still, the symbolic weight of bedding remains undeniable. The materials beneath your head spoke of your place in the world. You shift again, feeling the imagined difference beneath you. On straw, every turn reminds you of poverty, of toil. On feathers, every sigh assures you of power, of status. It is strange how rest itself becomes a language, how a night's sleep can declare as much about your standing as your clothes at a feast. And yet, there is a comic angle too. Imagine a noble grumbling about a lump in his featherbed, while a peasant mutters curses at an actual rock hiding in his sack. Both wake stiff, both rub their backs, both complain in their own way. In that sense, sleep unites them. No one, rich or poor, escapes the odd betrayal of bedding. Even a prince can toss on his mountain of pillows, discovering that wealth cannot conquer insomnia. The smells differ too. In noble chambers, incense sometimes burned, perfuming the air. Sheets might be washed in scented water, leaving a faint trace of rose or lavender. In peasant cottages, the air smells of smoke, animals, and sweat. Bedding absorbs it all, and each night you lie back into the scent of your day. You chuckle faintly. Perhaps this is why nobles traveled with their beds, not only for comfort, but to ensure they dreamed surrounded by their own familiar smells. The rituals of bed also differed. Nobles might undress with help from servants, slipping into nightclothes of fine linen. Peasants often slept in their work garments, too poor to own separate clothing. The notion of pajamas as a distinct outfit was unimaginable to most. You roll over, tugging your cloak tighter, and realize that sleepwear itself is a privilege. And yet, beneath all the difference, there is a shared vulnerability. Whether in featherbed or straw sack, everyone closed their eyes and surrendered. Dreams came for all, aches came for all, and morning demanded labor again. The prince woke to councils and hunts, the peasant to fields and flocks. Each faced the day shaped by the night's rest, or the lack of it. You think of a child in the cottage, curled against her mother's side, finding warmth in closeness, even when straw scratches her cheek. You think of a noble child in a chamber, tucked into fine linen, yet still clutching a small doll stuffed with rags. The contrast softens Humans, regardless of station, sought the same comfort, improvised or purchased, humble or grand. The curtain shifts, and you imagine yourself slipping from one bed to another, sampling both worlds. On straw, your back protests, but you laugh at the roughness, feeling alive in its simplicity. On feathers, your body sinks, but you almost miss the grounding crunch of hay. It is a reminder that no bed, however fine, can guarantee contentment. And so you settle once more, aware of the divide, but also of the common ground. Peasants and princes slept differently, yes, but both pursued the same fragile gift. A night of rest in a world that rarely gave peace. You sigh, your breath warm against the fabric, and let yourself sink into that timeless pursuit, closing your eyes as the night stretches onward. The embers crackle faintly, but the night has not finished teaching you. For though some sleep behind thick curtains or beneath straw-filled sacks, others rest outside altogether, their beds nothing more than cloaks laid on bare ground. If the cottage is crowded or the journey long, the earth itself becomes mattress, roofed only by stars and clouds. And in that wide expanse, shepherds, merchants, pilgrims, and wanderers alike discover another face of medieval sleep, one both harsh and strangely beautiful. The mainstream historical fact is that traveling was constant in the Middle Ages. Merchants moved along trade routes. Shepherds watched flocks in open pastures. Pilgrims trekked to shrines across Europe. Many could not afford inns, and even when they could, the lodgings were often full. Sleeping outdoors was common, whether in makeshift huts, under wagons, or simply on the ground. It was rarely romantic. It was practical necessity. You picture yourself now, lying on a hillside, the ground uneven, every stone an unwelcome acquaintance. The night wind grazes your face, tugging your cloak as if to test your endurance. The sheep huddle nearby, their bodies steaming faintly in the chill, offering more warmth than the thin wool across your shoulders. You turn, pressing your cheek against the earth, and feel the cool dampness cling. Sleep is not so much invited as stolen, grabbed in pieces whenever the body cannot resist longer. The quirky tidbit is that some shepherds built small turf huts or lean-tos, crude shelters of sticks, grass, and mud, to curl into for the night. Others used their crooks to prop up cloaks, forming miniature tents just large enough for one body. These were hardly cozy, but they kept dew from settling on your face, and some accounts suggest shepherds carried charms carved from bone or wood to guard them while they slept outside, convinced that the open night was not empty, but alive with spirits and unseen threats. Historians still argue whether outdoor sleepers found peace in this arrangement or constant fear. Some suggest that seasoned shepherds and merchants grew accustomed, even preferring the open air to the stench of crowded inns. Others argue that vulnerability to theft, animals, and weather must have made every night uneasy. The truth is likely both. Some nights felt free beneath the stars. Others brought nothing but exhaustion. You roll onto your back and stare upward. The stars shine brighter than anything you see in a city sky. They scatter so thickly that the darkness itself seems filled with sparks. You let your eyes trace patterns, the shapes of hunters and animals carved into heaven's canvas. Your breath slows, your chest rising gently, as though the night sky is pressing it down, urging calm. For a moment, you understand why some found a kind of peace here, why poets wrote of sleeping beneath stars as though cradled by eternity. But then a sound shatters it, the low growl of a wolf, distant but distinct. Your body stiffens, every muscle ready. The sheep bleat nervously, hooves clattering as they edge closer. You grip the crook in your hand, knowing it is a poor weapon, yet also the only one you have. The night, beautiful a moment ago, becomes sharp and dangerous. Sleep flees instantly, leaving you fully awake, heart-bending. Such is the rhythm of outdoor rest, moments of wonder pierced by jolts of fear. There is humor, too, though sometimes unkind. Imagine a merchant waking to find a goat chewing at his cloak, or a pilgrim groaning as rain turns his bed into a puddle. One chronicler notes a group of travelers waking to discover that pigs had rooted through their supplies while they slept, leaving them hungry and furious. It is slapstick survival, where even rest is vulnerable to comedy at your expense. And yet, even amid discomfort, there is resilience. You picture the shepherd, finally assured the wolf has passed, sitting by a small fire, his flock huddled tight. He dozes in snatches, head nodding forward, crook resting across his knees. The merchant curls beneath his wagon, the wooden wheels creaking when wind presses them. The pilgrim, weary but devout, whispers a prayer before lying back into the mud, convinced that heaven must notice such devotion. Sleep comes piecemeal, but it comes. The ground is not kind. Stones bruise, roots poke, dampness seeps. You shift constantly, seeking one smooth patch of earth. But the stars continue above, indifferent and steady. Their cold light softens the irritation, reminding you that discomfort is not permanent. You close your eyes again, letting fatigue overwhelm stubborn vigilance. Even on the hardest earth, the body eventually surrenders. You wake briefly when dawn hints at the horizon. The air is sharper now, the ground colder, but the sheep stir, stretching, bleating softly. The merchant shakes his cloak, brushing off dew. The pilgrim straightens, back stiff but determined. Morning has returned, and with it, the rhythm of travel. None of them look refreshed, but all of them look ready, because in this world, readiness matters more than comfort. You smile faintly, realizing that sleep outdoors, however ragged, carries its own lesson. It teaches that rest is not always gentle, not always private. Sometimes it is simply endurance, taken in fragments under stars, interrupted by fear, soothed by firelight, reshaped by necessity. And when dawn comes, even the poorest sleep is enough to rise again. So you pull your cloak tighter, close your eyes, and let the earth itself hold you, however unevenly, until the next sound or the next light shakes you awake. The ground fades from memory as you curl once more into the imagined bedding, and now your mind drifts toward the small rituals people invented to coax rest from such unkind circumstances. For if sleep was uncertain, interrupted by noise, crowded by bodies, hardened by earth, then remedies became as much a part of nightly life as prayers. People sought solutions in herbs, charms, foods, and whispered formulas, half medicine, half magic, all attempts to quiet the restless night. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval households often turned to natural remedies for sleep. Physicians trained in Galenic medicine advised light suppers, warm baths, or draughts of wine infused with herbs like poppy, lettuce, or valerian. Monastic texts recommended prayers before bed to settle the mind, aligning the body with divine order. Advice was practical at times, spiritual at others, reflecting the belief that sleep depended on both humors and holiness. You imagine yourself at a wooden table, the fire low, as someone prepares a bedtime drink. Warm milk swirls with honey, its sweetness cutting through the bitter taste of herbs steeped in the cup. A physician might insist this balances phlegm, ensuring the body cools enough to surrender to rest. Whether it works or not is less important than the comfort it offers. The warmth sliding down, the familiarity of a shared ritual, the hope that tonight will be gentler. The quirky tidbit is that some remedies border on absurd by modern standards. One prescription suggests placing a sprig of rosemary under your pillow to prevent nightmares. Another advises rubbing badger fat on your temples to ease insomnia. Some people tied small charms of iron or bone near their beds, convinced they would repel spirits that pressed on the chest at night. Lettuce was not only eaten, but sometimes placed beneath bedding, thought to cool the body and encourage slumber. You smile, picturing someone lying uncomfortably on a bed of salad, convinced it was the key to peaceful dreams. Historians still argue whether these remedies had real effect, or whether they worked mostly through belief. Did valerian root calm nerves, or did people simply feel soothed because they expected to be? Did rosemary truly ward off nightmares, or was it just the reassuring scent of something familiar? Evidence is mixed, and perhaps the truth lies in both directions. Some remedies had genuine sedative properties. Others worked because faith itself has power. You shift again beneath the blanket, recalling how remedies must have varied by class. Wealthy households could afford imported spices, opium, or specialized tinctures prepared by apothecaries with neat glass jars. Peasant cottages relied on what grew nearby: lettuce, chamomile, perhaps poppy seeds scattered sparingly. The difference between noble and common sleep extended even to remedies, another reflection of unequal worlds. There is humor in the idea of shared cures, too. Imagine a family sitting down to lettuce stew, children groaning while parents insist it will bring better dreams. Or a shepherd rubbing onion juice on his forehead because someone swore it would silence nightmares. The desperation to rest made even the strangest instructions seem reasonable. And perhaps, in the half-light of a restless night, reason mattered less than hope. Charms and prayers filled the gaps medicine could not. Children were given little amulets to keep nightmares away. Adults murmured verses before bed, crossing themselves or whispering invocations against spirits. Some believed sleeping on your right side encouraged peaceful dreams, while lying on your left invited indigestion and troubling visions. You laugh softly. Centuries later, people still argue over the best sleeping position, proving some habits never fade. You recall the connection between dreams and remedies, too. If a nightmare struck, remedies were sometimes prescribed after the fact. A bitter drink to cleanse the stomach, a charm to be tucked beneath the pillow, a prayer to be repeated nightly until the vision stopped. Nightmares were not dismissed as random. They demanded response, as though the mind's turmoil left a wound that had to be treated. The smells of herbs fill your imagination now. The sharpness of valerian, the sweetness of honey, the resinous tang of rosemary. They mingle with smoke and sweat, creating a bouquet both comforting and pungent. You breathe deeply, as though you too might be lulled into easier rest by these old methods. And perhaps you are, for ritual itself often soothes, even if the substance does not. The comic edge returns when you picture a nobleman complaining about his featherbed, insisting on exotic spices to ease his insomnia, while a peasant chews bitter lettuce leaves and mutters that both remedies taste equally foul. Sleep spares no one from its tricks, and both rich and poor are reduced to swallowing questionable cures in hopes of peace. You settle again, eyes closing, body heavy. Remedies swirl in memory, honeyed drinks, whispered prayers, charms tucked under straw. Whether they worked or not, they offered the comfort of trying, of believing that rest could be summoned with effort. And that belief, perhaps, was the strongest cure of all. As the night deepens, you let yourself sink into that fragile comfort, trusting, as countless others did, that whatever remedy was chosen tonight will be enough. The straw rustles as you turn again, and this time the warmth at your side feels different. It shifts, exhales, and lets out a faint snuffle. You reach down, and your hand brushes not cloth, but fur. In the medieval night, animals do not only wander in fields or sleep in barns, they often sleep with you. Cats, dogs, chickens, even pigs press close, their bodies lending heat, their noises blending into the already restless chorus of the dark. The mainstream historical fact is that animals shared living quarters with humans in many medieval homes. Peasants kept livestock indoors during winter, both to protect them from theft or predators and to use their body heat as an extra source of warmth. Dogs curled near doors as guards. Cats prowled rafters and corners, keeping rats at bay. For poorer families, the household was less a tidy separation of species and more a mingled space where survival blurred lines between human and animal rest. You imagine yourself now in such a cottage. The air is thick with the smell of wool, smoke, and dung. A pig shifts heavily in the corner, grunting as though annoyed at the cramped conditions. Chickens flutter faintly above in their perches, occasionally dropping feathers into your hair. A cat leaps onto the bed without warning, settling on your chest with the imperious authority only cats can summon. You sigh, deciding resistance is pointless. This, too, is medieval sleep. The quirky tidbit is that pigs were sometimes treated almost like family members in poorer households, sharing warmth with children in the same bed. Descriptions from the time remark on children dozing with piglets tucked against their sides, the animals squealing if disturbed. Dogs, too, were sometimes allowed under covers, though not always for sentiment, more for the fact that their heat was a cheaper alternative to more blankets. Imagine announcing at a feast today, "Yes, I sleep with my pig. It keeps my feet warm." Medieval villagers might nod approvingly. Historians still argue whether this mingling was common everywhere or more localized to specific regions and classes. Some claim only the poorest kept animals in sleeping quarters, while others point out that even wealthier households allowed favored hunting dogs or lapdogs to share beds. Cats were encouraged in nearly every class for their skill against vermin. The question remains, was this practice necessity, affection, or a mix of both? The debate lingers, much like the smell such arrangements must have left behind. You turn again, feeling the cat's steady purr against your ribs. Its rhythm is oddly calming, masking the snoring from the far side of the room. The dog by the door huffs in its sleep, paws twitching as though chasing something in its dreams. A chicken mutters softly, then settles again. You smile faintly, realizing that your sleep is now cradled by a menagerie, each creature contributing its presence to the uneasy warmth. There is humor here, of course. Picture the moment a rooster decides dawn has arrived hours early, leaping onto the bed frame and crowing directly into your ear. Or the dog who insists on stretching at the worst possible angle, shoving you toward the edge of the mattress. Or the cat, smug and immovable, taking the pillow for itself while you resign to a corner of straw. In some ways, medieval sleep resembles modern struggles. Pets rule the bed, and humans adapt. And yet, affection cannot be denied. Children surely clung to piglets as if to dolls. Dogs wagged tails before curling close. Cats purred their way into every available lap. The night, harsh and drafty, softened through companionship. For many, the presence of animals was not a nuisance, but comfort, a shared survival that blurred distinctions between owner and beast. You picture noble chambers, too, where favored hounds lounged by the hearth or leapt onto featherbeds. Small lapdogs slept at ladies' feet, their warmth considered not only pleasant, but medicinal. Some physicians even claimed the presence of dogs helped balance humors, soothing ailments through body heat. The wealthy may not have invited pigs into bed, but even they sought animal comfort, wrapped in silk instead of straw. The air grows heavier, layered with scents. You wrinkle your nose, half amused, half resigned. Smoke, sweat, hay, fur, all combine into a cocktail of medieval life. You tug the blanket higher, but the warmth comes as much from bodies, human and animal, as from cloth. And somehow, despite the crowding, your eyelids grow heavy. There is something deeply human about it, you realize. To lie surrounded by creatures, to accept their snores and shuffles as part of the rhythm, is to acknowledge a world less divided. In that space, animals are not only tools or food, they are companions, guards, heaters, even lullabies. Their nearness reminds you that survival was never solitary. It was shared, noisy, messy, but shared all the same. You stroke the cat absently, its purr vibrating against your chest. Outside, the sheep bleat faintly in their own restless patterns. The rooster stirs again, but stays quiet this time. Around you, humans and animals together breathe the same air, surrendering to the same dark. And as you close your eyes, you understand why people allowed such mingling. Comfort is not always clean or quiet. Sometimes it is fur in your face, feathers in your hair, a warm flank pressed against your side. Sometimes it is simply not being alone in the cold. You smile, drifting again, carried into dreams by the chorus of companions, human, beast, and bird alike, sharing one imperfect but enduring sleep. The rooster crows again, earlier than anyone wishes, and your first thought is not of dawn, but of danger. The medieval night was not just restless with sound or crowded with animals. It was also filled with fear. Fires, thieves, and unseen threats haunted every settlement. That is why towns imposed curfews, why watchmen patrolled the streets with lanterns, why people bolted doors and prayed their roofs would hold. Sleep was precious, but never guaranteed safety. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval towns established night watches, men tasked with guarding the streets, sounding alarms, and enforcing order after dark. Curfews rang from church bells, signaling when taverns must close and households extinguish their fires. The danger of open flame was immense. Thatched roofs, wooden beams, and tightly packed houses turned one spark into catastrophe. To sleep carelessly, leaving a fire untended, was to risk an entire neighborhood. You imagine yourself inside such a town. The bed curtains closed, but the faint glow of lanterns leaking through the shutters. Outside, boots strike stone in uneven rhythm as a watchman passes. His voice echoes, calling the hour, perhaps warning of no fire, no light, to remind you to keep your hearth safe. His lantern swings, a dim island of flame in streets otherwise swallowed by darkness. For a moment you feel reassured, knowing someone wakes while you rest. But then you remember, watchmen themselves were not always trustworthy. Some dozed, some drank, some turned thief themselves. Safety, like sleep, was fragile. The quirky tidbit is that watchmen sometimes carried horns or rattles to scare off criminals, or at least to sound official. In some towns, they sang verses as they walked, part prayer, part reminder of their presence. Imagine trying to sleep while a hoarse voice bellows rhymes about the dangers of fire or sin beneath your window. It is both protective and deeply annoying, the medieval equivalent of a car alarm that never stops. Historians still argue whether curfews were strictly enforced or more symbolic. Some records suggest heavy fines for breaking them. Others imply villagers regularly ignored them. Was the curfew truly about safety, or was it also about control, a way for authorities to regulate behavior and suppress tavern revelry? The debate continues, but the ringing of bells remains certain. A reminder that night belonged not only to sleepers, but to rules. You turn onto your side, imagining the smell of smoke still curling faintly from hearths hastily banked before curfew. Families whisper last prayers, hoping their embers will hold until morning without leaping into flames. Fires terrified communities, not only for the loss of homes, but for the loss of life. Villages and towns lacked quick ways to combat a blaze. Buckets passed from hand to hand, shouts filling the night. But once thatch caught, little could be done. To lie down each night meant trusting your neighbor's caution as much as your own. The fear of thieves pressed close, too. Roads swarmed with bandits, and towns offered little protection once darkness fell. Locks were crude, doors thin, shutters fragile. A determined intruder could force entry easily, unless deterred by the chance of waking an entire household in one crowded bed. That, perhaps, was another hidden advantage of shared sleep. There were always many bodies to stir if danger arrived. Still, the watchman's footsteps echo. You hear a faint bark as a dog senses his approach. Somewhere, a drunkard stumbles, ignored unless he grows loud enough to warrant a fine. The night hums with tension, not constant terror, but constant readiness. You sleep, yes, but you never forget the thinness of walls, the greed of fire, the presence of strangers. There is humor here too, though it is dark. Imagine a watchman shaking you awake at midnight because your chimney smoked too much, while his own cloak smolders from the lantern he carries carelessly. Or picture a thief sneaking into a house, only to be chased out not by men, but by a furious rooster. Fear never eliminated comedy. In fact, the absurd often arrived when tension was highest. Still, you cannot deny the fragility of this world. In one account, a town lost half its homes to a single candle knocked over by a child. In another, watchmen fined a man for carrying a torch after curfew, only to use his flame themselves when their lantern sputtered. The line between protection and peril was thin, and sleep balanced upon it precariously. You roll again, listening as silence settles for a moment. The watchman has passed, the drunkard fallen quiet, the dog curled back into rest. For a brief stretch, you feel calm. Yet even that calm carries the weight of vigilance. You know morning may not come without alarms. The curtain presses gently against your cheek as you sigh. You think of the peasants in cottages, sleeping near their animals to guard against wolves. You think of nobles in castles, where guards patrolled walls, but betrayal still lurked within. Safety was relative, and sleep was never truly free of its shadow. But somehow, people rested anyway. They learned to live with the risks, to trust watchmen despite flaws, to accept curfews, to pray against fire. They did not need perfect security to close their eyes. They needed only enough hope, enough routine, enough resilience. You let that thought settle as you drift again, the echo of boots fading into memory. Sleep in this world is a kind of courage, a small act of defiance against everything waiting in the dark. And as you surrender once more, you join centuries of sleepers who closed their eyes not because they were safe, but because they had to rise again with dawn. The boots fade from memory, yet the echo lingers in your chest, carrying you deeper into the rhythm of the medieval night. You realize now that for many, sleep was not only shaped by warmth, noise, danger. It was governed by the church itself. Bells, prayers, and rules stretched into the very fabric of rest, binding people's nights to divine schedules, as firmly as daylight bound them to labor. Sleep belonged not only to the body, but to God. The mainstream historical fact is that monastic communities followed strict patterns of prayer, known as the divine office, which divided the day and night into hours. Monks rose in the darkness for matins, later called vigils, often around midnight, returning again at dawn for lauds. Their nights were never unbroken. Rest came in intervals, punctuated by chanting psalms, in cold chapels lit by flickering lamps. Ordinary villagers, too, were tethered to church bells, which tolled across towns and countryside, marking canonical hours, calling people to prayer or warning them of curfews. Sleep, like work, was subject to ecclesiastical authority. You picture a monastery now, stone walls thick yet always cold, air smelling of wax and damp wool. The dormitory lies in silence until the bell tolls, deep and resonant, pulling men from their pallets. They rise in near unison, robes dragging, sandals slapping stone. No matter how weary they are, no matter how sweet the dream they've left, the summons must be obeyed. They shuffle into the chapel, voices joining in chant. To sleep uninterrupted is indulgence. To wake for prayer is discipline. The quirky tidbit is that some monks, unable to resist drowsiness during long night vigils, leaned against wooden stalls or rested their heads in their hands as they chanted. Chroniclers occasionally scold them for nodding off mid-psalm, but the reality is obvious. Even the most devout could not always conquer fatigue. Rules grew elaborate, dictating how monks should sleep, fully clothed in habits, belts fastened, ready to rise at the bell. Some orders even banned soft bedding, insisting straw sacks were dangerous to the soul because comfort tempted beyond sloth. Imagine trying to sleep with a belt cinched tight, convinced that ease itself might corrupt you. Historians still argue whether these rules were universally observed or more often flouted. Did monks always obey the strict schedules, or did they sometimes linger under blankets when the bell rang, whispering excuses to themselves? Was the ordinary villager truly awakened by every toll, or did they simply roll over, muttering that God could wait until morning? The evidence is mixed, leaving us to wonder whether devotion or exhaustion usually triumphed in the middle of the night. You shift in your imagined bed, tugging your blanket tighter, and suddenly, the toll of bells seems louder. They are not gentle. They are commands echoing across rooftops, telling you that even in sleep, you belong to something larger. To ignore them is rebellion. To heed them is weary obedience. Either way, the sound carves into your night, rearranging rest into fragments. In towns, the bells regulated more than piety. They announced market openings, curfews, even emergencies. For many, the bell was the only clock they would ever know. Sleep, meals, and work bent to its rhythm, whether you were ready or not. The irony is sharp. The very sound meant to guide often disrupted. A baby stirs. A dog barks. A villager sighs into his pillow. The bell cares little. Its toll cuts through night, demanding attention. There is humor here too, though tinged with sympathy. Picture a monk jerking awake in chapel, head lolling forward, mumbling the wrong psalm while his brothers glare. Or a peasant jolted upright by midnight bells, muttering, "If God wants me awake, he can plow my fields tomorrow." Humans have always found ways to grumble at authority, even when it rings from heaven. And yet, you cannot deny the strange power of this rhythm. For monks, the broken night became a ladder to the divine. Each rung another prayer, lifting them closer. For villagers, the bells wove life into a communal pattern, binding scattered households into a single heartbeat. Even as they cursed, they listened, and in listening, they belonged. You picture again the monastery dormitory, rows of straw pallets, monks lying stiff in their habits. The bell tolls. They rise, chant, return, and sleep again for a few hours before dawn. Their lives are cycles, each day repeating the last, each night measured by the same sound. And you realize that to them, this was not cruelty. It was discipline, a way of ordering time so that even dreams bowed to God. But what of those who lived outside cloisters? Ordinary villagers were not exempt. Church bells tolled curfews, signaled festivals, called for prayers. Some households kept devotional routines before bed, whispering psalms or lighting candles before icons. Others carried charms, blessed by priests, sliding them beneath pillows to guard against nightmares. Even in private, religion shaped the contours of sleep. You pull the blanket closer and wonder how many nights were spent wrestling with this dual demand, the body begging for rest, the church insisting on prayer. The tension is timeless. Even now, we struggle between exhaustion and obligation, between what our bodies want and what our calendars demand. For medieval sleepers, that conflict rang in their ears, literal and unrelenting. The smell of smoke drifts faintly in your mind, mixed with wax from chapel candles, wool from monkish robes. You imagine the chant, low and droning, filling the stone hall like waves. It is beautiful, but also soporific, the kind of sound that makes eyelids heavy, even as lips keep moving. Perhaps that was part of the mercy. The very prayers that interrupted sleep also carried singers back toward it. And yet, sleep under these rules was never indulgent. Beds were firm, blankets few, positions dictated. To curl luxuriously, to seek softness, was suspect. Rest was duty, not pleasure. Another arena in which the soul was tested. That thought makes you laugh softly, because centuries later, people still feel guilty about sleeping too much, as though rest itself must be justified. Some habits never die. You turn again, hearing the bell toll faintly in your imagination. Its echo is steady, unbending, indifferent. But beneath the sound, you also hear the softer rhythms, monks whispering, peasants muttering, children sighing in their sleep. These are the real sounds of the medieval night. Not just authority, but humanity pressing against it, bending, sometimes breaking, but always continuing. And as you drift once more, you realize that sleep, shaped by the church, was not destroyed by it. It was molded, redirected, sometimes interrupted, but always reclaimed. People still dreamed, still rested, still rose again. The bells may have ruled, but the body remained stubborn. In that tension lay the story of medieval nights, obedience and resistance, prayer and fatigue. discipline, and surrender. You let the curtain brush your cheek as your eyes close. The bell rings again, but this time it feels less like command and more like lullaby. You breathe with it, slow and deep, until the sound fades into the distance and you sink again, carried toward morning. The curtain stirs again, and faint light bleeds through the cracks of the shutter. The long medieval night finally loosens its grip, and dawn presses at the edges of the hall. Sleepers stir, stretching stiff limbs, groaning softly as they rise from straw or featherbeds alike. For shepherds in fields, the sheep are already restless, bleating hungrily, hooves thudding against damp earth. The night, with its noise, prayers, fears, and odd comforts, yields at last to morning. You imagine yourself rising from the bed, brushing hay from your hair, rubbing eyes still heavy. The floor is cold underfoot, the air sharp with smoke and dew. A child yawns beside you, tugging at a cloak, while in the corner a dog shakes vigorously, sending dust into the air. The pig grunts, the rooster crows once more, and the cottage comes alive with movement. Dawn means labor begins again, and there is little time to linger. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval mornings began early, often with the tolling of bells. Work was demanded by sunrise, fields plowed, animals fed, fires rekindled, markets prepared. Sleep ended not when bodies felt ready, but when light demanded action. Even nobles rose with expectation, though their tasks differed. Morning councils replaced plows, feasts replaced chores, but the rhythm was equally relentless. The quirky tidbit is that some shepherds were said to greet the dawn by blowing simple horns, signaling to one another across valleys that flocks had survived the night. Others sang short rhymes or chants as they led animals out, voices carrying over misty fields. It was half ritual, half reassurance, a way to mark the night's end and celebrate survival. You can almost hear those echoes now, thin melodies threading through cold air. Historians still argue whether dawn routines were orderly or chaotic. Some accounts describe structured mornings, bells ringing, chores executed with discipline. Others suggest frantic scenes, children crying, animals clamoring, households scrambling to begin the day. Likely both were true, depending on wealth, season, or temperament. The one certainty is that dawn erased the fragile boundary of night and ushered people into work once more. You step outside, the chill seizing your cheeks, mist coiling around your ankles. The world is pale and wet, sky streaked with gray and faint gold. Sheep huddle close, bleating, and you prod them gently forward, staff in hand. Behind you, smoke curls from cottage chimneys, thin ribbons of life rising into morning air. The village hums with motion, water drawn, bread baked, tools readied. The night's curtain falls, its dreams and fears tucked away until dusk. There is humor even here. Imagine the weary shepherd stumbling half awake, tripping over a stubborn lamb, or a noble yawning through morning council, struggling to appear wise, while his thoughts still muddle with dreams. Morning has always carried reluctance, a universal truth linking centuries. No one, rich or poor, greets every dawn gladly. Yet, as the sun edges higher, light spreads warmth across stone and soil. The fear of fire, thieves, and demons dissolves in brightness. The noises shift too. Roosters crow, carts clatter, vendors call. The night's orchestra gives way to the day's. And though rest was imperfect, though dreams were strange, though discomfort lingered, people rise anyway. steady and uncomplaining. You walk farther with the sheep, their bodies pressing close, their bleats rhythmic, and you think of the long night behind you. Segmented sleep, crowded beds, restless animals, bells, prayers, remedies, fears, all threads woven into one tapestry. Medieval sleep was never silent, never private, rarely luxurious, but it was shared, resilient, shaped by necessity and belief. And as dawn opens wide, you feel the weight of that resilience. Humans have always found ways to rest, however imperfect. In straw or feathers, under stars or curtains, beside family or beasts, they closed their eyes and trusted the night to carry them. And now, like them, you step forward, carrying the memory of that night into the brightness of day. The journey slows now, voice softening, steps gentler, as though the night itself is exhaling after its long labor. You lie back once more, though in imagination, and let the images blur. The flicker of candles, the rustle of straw, the bleating of sheep, the tolling of bells. Each fragment fades into a softer whole, not jagged anymore, but smooth, like waves lapping against a quiet shore. The curtain that once pressed against your cheek now feels lighter, almost transparent, as if dawn has thinned it into silk. You breathe slower, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the hush. Sleep, once broken by noise and fear, now drapes itself gently over you, like a cloak laid by careful hands. The world grows muffled, and even the rooster's cry becomes distant, softened into something harmless, like a child humming far away. The worries of fire, thieves, demons, and drafts drift out of reach. They are not erased, but they no longer matter. They dissolve into shadows, retreating with the night. What remains is stillness, patient and forgiving, waiting for you to surrender. Your eyes grow heavier with each breath, and every sound lengthens, stretching into calm silence. You picture again the shepherd counting sheep, fumbling numbers, muttering into the dark. You smile, because even his mistakes are lulling. Each count, each bleat, each shuffle becomes part of the rhythm that carries you. And now, you no longer need to count. The sheep fade into clouds, the clouds into nothing. So rest, slowly, steadily, without effort. Let the long medieval night close gently, not with fear, but with quiet. Sleep waits, soft and sure, and it carries you now, deeper, calmer, into silence, into